Well, let's talk about campaign strategy now. We're joined by three veteran campaign managers. Michele Cadario is the CEO of Vanguard Strategy, a former national campaign director for the Liberals. Cheryl Oates is principal at GT, most recently was the campaign director for the Saskatchewan NDP. And Jordan Paquet is vice president of Blue Sky Strategy Group and was deputy campaign manager for the PEI-PC party in the last provincial campaign. Hello to all three of you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So, Michele, I'm going to get you to start us out here because, the Liberals seem to have the momentum on their side right now. How do you think that will influence the kind of campaign that we're going to see from the party?
Well, I actually think it's going to be a very different campaign than any of us has ever experienced. It is never before have we had one issue that is so galvanizing and has it been so clear what the ballot box question is going to be in advance of the writ actually being dropped. This election is about who is going to be the best person to deal with Donald Trump, and a corollary to that, who can best position the Canadian economy so that we can become less dependent on the United States. And so I think that it's going to be a very different one. I think it's going to be very difficult for all the parties in terms of how they interact with each other, because partisanship, like you normally see in campaigns and how nasty it's been getting, time over time, I'm not sure that that's going to be something that's acceptable as we're in this kind of difficult period, because the government's going to have to keep one eye on the ball on what's going on in the United States and what is Donald Trump doing. He's going to have a huge impact on not just what we talk about, but about how they comport themselves. Because there is this Team Canada sense right now. You see it from Doug Ford, you see it from all the premiers, and I think that's in response to the expectation that Canadians have about people coming together and fighting this fight together. So I'm really interested to see how this all lays out, and I think it's going to be very challenging for different campaigns, especially the opposition, to differentiate themselves.
Okay, you say the opposition. I'll bring you in right now, Jordan, because the Conservatives, bearing in mind what we just heard from Michele, that this is going to be a different kind of campaign because of Donald Trump, Conservatives might be facing a very tough decision right now, because while their lead is shrinking, they're still in the lead. And then you have onto that the lift that Mark Carney has provided for the Liberals. How does that affect the type of campaign do you think that we're going to see from the Tories?
Well, I think to start, campaigns matter. Whatever the polls are right now, there's differentiating ones. It's not going to be the same come Election Day. It's going to be a short campaign, obviously, but Mark Carney has just come through a Liberal leadership where he hasn't been tested. Pierre Poilievre has been out traveling the country for the last couple of years. He's used to it. He's used to answering the tough questions from reporters. So I think Conservatives are just really anxious to get going, to get out onto the debate stage, and just take the fight directly to the Liberals. Because right now, Mark Carney is eating up all the airwaves because he's the newly elected Prime Minister, traveling over to Europe. That's great, but come an actual election time, when the media are going to be covering all campaigns day in, day out, we're going to really see that differentiation. I agree with Michele.
Do you care to say what type of differentiation we're going to see?
I think we're going to start to see who's going to build a more resilient economy. You can't manage Trump. You can't deal with Trump. It's a matter like he can't be managed. He's not something like that. So we have to look internally to see who can build and strengthen the Canadian economy here. And that's Conservatives have been putting things in the window for the past couple of years, whether it's on resource development, whether it's on making our tax policy more competitive. So I think Pierre's been able to get ahead of the curve on some of these policy matters, and that's what they're going to continue to push forward on.
In terms of how that message is delivered, though, and I think that's in large part what Michele's trying to get to here, how Pierre Poilievre delivers that message is also a big question mark for a lot of people watching this campaign.
Sure, absolutely, but I think Conservatives are still going to go in with that idea of change. Most of the time, governments aren't elected by some massive popularity. It's governments that get too long in the tooth get defeated, or governments that perform well get re-elected. Fine, but most time when we're looking at a change in government, it's about Canadians getting tired with who's there, and I think Conservatives will really just continue to make that comparison.
Pierre doesn't have to change the way he delivers.
No, he's
the
not going to
message.
just suddenly start. I mean, he's still the opposition leader. He has to sharpen the attacks on Carney. You can see when Mark Carney gets challenged, he gets rattled. He gets condescending to reporters, as he did yesterday. And so I think you'll see Poilievre and the Conservatives really try and throw some of those punches.
Okay, Cheryl's giggling in the back here, so I'm going to bring you in, Cheryl.
I'm just laughing. I'm laughing at the Conservatives now saying, look at Mark Carney being so condescending to reporters. When we've watched Pierre Poilievre, when faced with questions from reporters, petulantly eat an apple into the microphone as he refused to answer the question. So I think, honestly, there's been a lot of stretches lately in terms of, trying to find new attacks on Mark Carney now that the carbon tax is gone. And this is just another one. If we're going to talk about interaction with the media and respect for the media, I don't think the Conservatives have a leg to stand on.
Okay, so in terms of, that's the concerns, but in terms of the NDP, I also want to ask you, because, you've run campaigns, you've managed the campaigns, and here you have right now the party, based on current polling, not doing very well, and I know the party likes to talk about running a national campaign. Is that what we're going to see here, or is it better for the NDP to focus on ridings that the party actually thinks it can win?
I think it's going to have to do a bit of both. Like, certainly the NDP is not going to go into this campaign not putting forth an image of running candidates in all of the seats and spending the maximum. It's certainly going to be running what looks to be a national, Canada-wide, in every riding campaign. But when you look at the polling, yeah, they're going to have to focus their resources, especially on their incumbent ridings. And if they're, partway through the campaign, they're going to have to decide, is this really a growth election for us, or are we trying to save the furniture? So, yeah, it's going to be a little bit of both as they, try to continue to spread their message and remind people what the NDP has fought for in Canada, while at the same time, really focusing the resources they have on a few select seats.
Mm-hmm. Michele, you mentioned Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is going to be a factor, if for the very fact that on April the 2nd, which will be somewhere mid-campaign, it seems at this point, there's going to be another round of tariffs that are being threatened against Canada. What that actually looks like, we don't know yet. But, how does Donald Trump change how each of the leaders have to react? And Michele, I'll begin with you on that, with Mr. Carney, because being, the Prime Minister right now, he has some exposure to what Donald Trump is doing, the discussions behind closed doors. But how do you think that's going to affect that campaign for Mr. Carney?
Well, he has the added benefit and the burden of actually being the Prime Minister, and it's quite the stuff to carry going into your rookie campaign. And so he's not only learning about kind of the pace of a campaign and the daily demands and all of that, he is very much having to deal with another country's leader who is provocative, who will be making decisions that directly impact the Canadian economy, and probably taking shots at us along the way, telling people that he wants to take us over. So, Mr. Carney has to, as all prime ministers do in that place, but it's even different this time. He has to be prime minister first because that's the expectation on him. Canadians will expect him, above all people, to be focused on their security and to be less partisan than it might happen for a Liberal leader leading a government into an election campaign. I really do believe that this is going to be something that we've never seen before, and how you actually have and what kind of a partisan debate you can have that's maybe just a little bit higher level. And I also would say, I think Canadians are more tuned into this than they ever have before. I'm hopeful it's going to be, really high turnout in terms of voting. But, usually when elections start, you don't count on Canadians really tuning in to the last 10 days. This one, they're going to be ready and watching every single step, I think, from the moment that the call is dropped.
Mm-hmm. Cheryl, you're nodding your head a lot, so I'm going to go to you next. First react maybe to what you heard from Michele, which is why you're nodding your head, but also talk about how Donald Trump will affect what we're going to see from Mr. Singh.
Yeah, I think the fact that this election will be largely focused around the current trade war and economic threats coming from the U.S. is almost a gift to those who want the electorate to pay attention. It is so hard, just like Michele said, and this is why I'm nodding, it's so hard to get voters, to get citizens to pay attention throughout an election cycle. There's usually a couple of, big peaks when the writ drops, when there's a debate and up to voting day, but there's sort of lulls in between there where people tune out, they have other things going on in their lives. When we are faced with a threat that really impacts everything when it comes to the future of Canada, our economic security, our energy security, people are paying attention in a way that they don't normally pay attention in politics and in the news. And that is a gift to our leaders who have something to say about it, who want the electorate to engage with them and listen to them and really decide and weigh who is the best person to deal with these threats from the United States.
And when it comes to Mr.
And so when
Singh?
it comes to relevance, sorry?
And when it comes to Mr. Singh, how it will affect his...
Yeah, when it comes to Mr. Singh, this will be a challenge for the NDP to have something to say that first is different than what Mark Carney is saying, and sort of positions Jagmeet Singh as the guy to take on the United States. And I'm not even sure that that's necessarily what the NDP want Canadians to be considering in this election. I think the NDP is positioning themselves as who will take care of you in these really, really tough times. And you know, if that's the question, it's a great question for them. It's just going to be hard to push the electorate to be thinking about that and not who can take on Donald Trump.
Jordan, what will Mr. Trump do for Mr. Poilievre's campaign?
I think they're going to largely just try and talk more again about inside and resiliency. As we've seen, Trump has the ability to move the polls here just by speaking out of both sides of his mouth and saying things that kind of just galvanizes attention. I agree with my colleagues here that Canadians are very engaged right now. I think this will be a very high turnout for voters, but I don't think you'll hear Poilievre spending a whole lot of time talking only about Trump. Obviously, he's going to talk about how do we strengthen our own country here, and that's what he's been talking about. The other thing that they're obviously going to get to is this is still an election campaign. It's going to be tough debates. It's going to be a tough fight all around, and there's going to be shots thrown from all parties. And I think what you'll really see from the Conservatives is coming out early and trying to define Mark Carney. Canadians don't really know who he is. They know the name, they know the jobs he's held in the past, but there's tons of opposition research out there that Conservatives are just ready to start throwing out.
Okay. Well, you know, we expect it to happen in the next few days. I look forward to speaking to the three of you again as the campaign gets underway. Michele, Cheryl, and Jordan, thank you for the time.
Thanks, Mike.